G'day listeners and welcome to another APS Weekly News Bulletin, keeping you up to date and well informed on the Australian property market and what's happening in real time. Now guys, jumping straight into this, story number one, Help to Buy officially passes Parliament. Article by Alyssa Steedman of the ABC News. The federal government's Help to Buy bill, which hopes to target low and middle income earners trying to get onto the property ladder, has passed into law by Parliament on Wednesday. Labor says the scheme will bring the dream of home ownership back into reach for thousands of Australians. What is the Help to Buy scheme? In essence, the Help to Buy scheme will allow participants to co-purchase a home with the government. How does it work? Housing Australia will act on behalf of the Commonwealth to administer Help to Buy in the states and territories. The federal government will give buyers taking part in the scheme an equity contribution of up to 40% of the cost of a new home or 30% of existing homes. The buyers will need to pay a mortgage for their share of the property, but they won't need to pay rent on the stake owned by the government. Mortgages can only be taken out with a select list of lenders provided by Housing Australia. Houses, townhouses, and units will all be eligible under the scheme, but there will be a price cap, which we'll go into a little bit further down. Who will be eligible? The federal government will facilitate the purchase of 40,000 homes over 4 years under the scheme. But if you think about applying, there are some caveats. You have to be an Australian citizen and at least 18 years of age. You must satisfy the financial capacity test, which considers whether you are likely to be able to purchase a property without the scheme's help. If you're buying on your own, you'll need to have a yearly income under $90,000. And if you're buying with someone else or a partner, your combined income must be less than $120,000 combined. You must not currently own any other land or property in Australia or overseas, and you have to live in the house. The good news is if you've owned property in the past, it won't rule you out of the scheme. So effectively, guys, helping people get in on the bottom end, those lower middle income earners, get into it, whether you've owned a property or not, but effectively you cannot own anything else at that time of purchase. How much could you save? Former Housing Minister Julie Collins said in a statement last year it would bring home ownership back into reach for thousands of Australians. It won't just be a leg up into home ownership with savings from a smaller deposit. It will provide longer-term relief to Australians who are part of the scheme. In fact, Help to Buy could help eligible new homeowners save hundreds every month on their mortgage. Labor has said the Help to Buy scheme could cut mortgages by up to $380,000, depending on the price paid for each home. But you'll have to pay a component of any capital gains back to the government. The capital gains will be calculated based on the size of the government's equity share in the property. For example, if the government owns a 30% share of your home, it will be entitled to 30% of the proceeds of the sale, as well as obviously paying back that 30%. What are the property price caps? Don't get overexcited about securing the house of your dreams right away. First up, you need a deposit of at least 2% of the purchase price for the home you want to buy. There's also a limit on how much you can bid for, depending on the median house price in the area you're buying in. For example, the property price cap for cities in Queensland is $700,000, while for cities in New South Wales, it's $950,000. Now, guys, everywhere I looked for this as well to stipulate what was considered an actual city, because it did say regional cities or centres as well. I couldn't actually find like a population or where that came from too, which would be an interesting thing to sort of consider. But yeah, anyway, it says cities. It didn't stipulate just the capital city. It just said cities in specific states. Here's a full list of price caps across Australia. If we go into the ACT, capitals and regional centres, $750, rest of the state, $600. New South Wales, $950 for capital and regional centres, the rest of the state, $750. Northern Territory, $600 for capital and regional, $550 for the rest of the state. Queensland, $700 and $550. South Australia, $600 and $450. Tasmania, $600 and $450. Victoria, $850 for the capital and regional centres, $650 for the rest of the state and territory. Western Australia, $600,000 and $450K respectively. So interesting to kind of see there as well, guys. A bit more stuff to run through here, but very interesting to see the gap there and kind of the difference between capitals and regional centres too. We'll go into this in a second. PRD chief economist Diaswati Madismio said buyers will be able to access a decent chunk of each area's property market under the price caps. For Sydney, $950,000 will only get you about 10% of houses in the suburbs of Sydney, but it'll get you about 30 to 35% of units. $700,000 will get you about half the market in Brisbane and Melbourne, and $850,000 will get you about 45%, but that's really of the unit market, not the whole thing. Now, to run through the pros, guys, and we're almost done here of this article, I thought it was pretty lengthy and actually worth going into for a few different factors. Pros around this: lenders are more likely to consider the federal government as a secure partner, make it easy to get approved for a mortgage. If you buy under a joint application with someone else, but they want to cut out down the line, you can put someone else on the arrangement so long as your joint incomes do not exceed the $120,000 cap. Obviously, there's plenty of pros in this, but one of the big things to point out is lenders are likely to consider the federal government as a secure partner, making it easy to get approval for a mortgage. We're talking 30 to 40% that they're literally going to come in and you're not going to have to pay it back. It's going to allow people to pay a lot more for a property and effectively already have a deposit in there, even if they're not stumping it up, which is going to allow people to pay a lot more. Cons, there's a limited number of placements each year. So remember, it's 40,000 homes over the next 4 years, so 10,000 a year as an allocation. If the government ends its arrangement with you, you have just 90 days to pay back its share of the property. So for anyone doing it, you'd want to be making sure you're not, falling outside that parameter and having to pay that back if at all possible. In summary, guys, to kind of really break this down as well, like many people see this as their foot in the door. And I think like if your only strategy or if your only thing that you're trying to do out there in life is obviously buy your own primary residence, it is a foot in the door for a lot of people. And it will be a really strong foot in the door for a lot of Australians out there. I think what's important to note and probably what's very interesting to consider is how it might actually affect the market from a growth perspective, especially different areas or regional cities that have higher caps and they might have income to support that in the area. You might get a lot of people that now all of a sudden are actually able to buy this style of property that they never before thought they could, or maybe the deposit was way too hard for them to be able to get together. And all of a sudden, the government's guaranteeing a 30% deposit. So there's a lot of these areas that I think might actually see a little spike as a result off the back of this. It's going to depend because 10,000 strewn across the whole country. It's not a huge amount, but at the same time, it's not a small amount. So I think like it's really going to depend where it is and potentially where it's really driven. And I think understanding incomes in an area will really add to this as well, because that is a big factor. Like you got 120,000 combined. That's two people on 60 or someone on 80 and 40, and a 90K cap for a single as well. So I think this could actually have a pretty decent effect potentially on. There's a few different markets, but potentially on decent regionals where, there's a lot of people that could get in at that sort of money on that income because they're in that area that's potentially a little bit of a lower pay, but also, have that ability of going through with the government reinforcing it. So I like that, as a potential booster for the market. Any sort of stimulus like this will always have an influence and an impact on the market. It's not something that we really need to consider from an investing strategy, but in terms of an actual location perspective, that's where consideration should come into it. Rent vesting obviously is much likely a better option. So if anyone thinking about this for their own portfolio, I probably wouldn't really do it unless you absolutely could not get into the market, and it was going to be many years until you could get into the market. This could maybe get your foot in the door, go buy in an area you think is going to grow well, have it as a primary residence for a few years, and if it was in the right growth location, and sell it off. But otherwise, it doesn't really fit the bill for anyone else that can go harder outside of it. Because I would say there would be caps and issues around releasing equity within this as well. Again, I try to find something on that. Nothing clearly stipulated it. So the only people from an investment side that this might suit is someone that maybe literally is going to take 2-3 years or something to save their first deposit. This could get you in the door. Otherwise, I would still be going down the normal avenues that we do. Again, I think the younger generation will be in the thick of this. But the other side of things too, I feel like the other kind of thing that is going to be cool about this is people that maybe they're in their 40s and 50s, lower middle income earners that, maybe never thought they're going to be able to buy their own home. This may be the opportunity that a lot of those guys get to do it. So again, if you understand, or if we can understand where that might be, that we might see a flow-on effect of that and a bit of additional, pressure in the market because of that, we might see a little bit of blip and a bit of a push from that side too. So I think it's actually really great, for a lot of Australians that this could help. From an investing perspective, we just want to take advantage of, or just understanding of where may be positively impacted by it, and then potentially go and put the dollars there if there's going to be enough of an impact as well. As a final summary on this, grants and stimulus like this will always put a bit of exactly that stimulus into the market, into the economy. Understanding where it might take effect is really, really important, and can obviously, be a nice little windfall if you get into the correct markets as well. Moving on from that and moving into story number 2 is why Victorian home buyers will be worse off under the Help to Buy scheme. Now, this was actually an interesting thing to unpack, an interesting article to unpack as well. And it's written by Sebastian Holloman from Real Estate Business. And he writes that nearly 30% of Victorians currently eligible for the state's Home Buyer Fund will actually no longer qualify for the federal government's proposed Help to Buy scheme as a result of the stricter income limits and reduced property price caps. So a report from the Parliamentary Budget Office has revealed that 670,000 Victorian residents, representing almost 30% of those currently eligible for the state-funded Home Buyer Fund, would not be able to access the federal government's Help to Buy scheme. This research had been undertaken after the Victorian government revealed in the state's 24-25 budget that it would close the Home Buyer Fund to new entrants once the federal government's proposed Help to Buy scheme is legislated and established. On the 11th of June this year, Rachel Payne, member for the South Eastern Metropolitan Region of Victoria, asked the PBO to project how many Victorians would lose access to a shared equity scheme through transition of the Help to Buy scheme. The PBO's report found that single income applicants with no dependents would only be eligible for Help to Buy if their yearly income is below $90,000, like the article just ran through, a marked decrease from the Victorian scheme limit of $135,000. That's literally you're losing 50% there. You're losing that extra $45,000 of eligibility. Under the new scheme, the income thresholds for single parent applicants would decrease from $135,000 to $90,000, while joint applications would see a reduction from $216,000 to $120,000. So that's almost halving. The report also determined that the maximum property price threshold would fall under the new system, decreasing by 10.5% to $850,000 for houses in Melbourne and Geelong, reducing 7.1% to $650,000 for property in the rest of Victoria. Critically, the PBO also noted that reduced property price thresholds would lead to 7.8% or 10,000 of Victorian property sales estimated to qualify for the Home Buyer Fund in 24-25, no longer being eligible under the new Help to Buy. According to the report's findings, 2,700 Victorian property sales, or 2% of the state's total home purchases over 22-23, were completed under the state's Home Buyer Fund, scheme set to be replaced by the federal government's proposed Help to Buy initiative. I say proposed because that article got released before this was done. It is now passed and it is coming in. It has passed Parliament, it is coming in. So guys, in summary on that, whilst obviously it's a great thing this thing has come in for some people being able to do it, it's in Victoria, it's actually going to be a detrimental effect. A lot fewer people are going to be able to do it. As they're saying there, the Victorian Help to Buy scheme or Home Buyer scheme is actually being nullified now, and the Help to Buy from the government is coming in, from the federal government. It is significantly different. The threshold thing for me is not that big of a difference, but the actual income thresholds are massive, right? So, it's a huge drop, especially on the singles, but even on the couples, the couples is almost double. It's about an 80% drop, which is immense, and it's a 50% drop just about on the singles as well. So that will have a bit of a different impact on the Victorian market as well. It's probably not going to be as big a spike. Actually, if anything, I don't think it actually will affect the Victorian market when we throw this into the equation, because if this was already in place in the Victorian market and they're actually dialing it back, then this may actually impact it in a little bit more of a negative way of now a little bit of extra serviceability and not what actually coming back out of the market and a lower pool of people actually being able to do it. So whilst this was probably a good thing for the Victorian economy and housing market when this was in over the last couple of years, this change, on reflection of this, reading these two together, I think will actually take a little bit of heat out of the Victorian market, a little bit of that extra stimulus and buying potential from that perspective as well. So, guys, I hope that gave you a bit of understanding. A few people wrote in and asked me to do a bit of a breakdown on the Help to Buy scheme. I enjoyed running through it. I hope it took some value. If you know anyone else that would also take some value, make sure you send this episode on. If you haven't left us a 5-star review yet and you're enjoying or loving the potty, please jump on, leave us a 5-star review. And also, if you're loving it, and once again, if you haven't hit the follow or subscribe button, make sure you hit the follow or the subscribe button on your favorite listening platform. And until next week, guys, that's another APS Weekly News Bulletin.